Cheers, guys. Epix 911. Welcome to the Wednesday, February 22nd, 2017 edition of VR News. I want to thank you guys for the birthday greets yesterday in the comment section. Much appreciated. Cheers for that. It is hump day today. 2 days until Gaming Friday. Even now, the weekend beckons us forth. 2 may they be quick days. Let's talk about Squanchtendo. These are the guys behind Accounting, which was, to put it simply, an adult game. Short, but funny. I personally enjoyed it. One thing to keep in mind, if you haven't, and I urge you, especially if you like adult humor, of the South Park, that kind of variety, you're probably going to get a chuckle out of this. Just keep in mind it's not work or kidlet safe. So if you've got kids around, most of the visuals aren't so bad. Well, there's a few, but definitely the audio. So just keep that in mind. The next game that they're working on, according to a recent interview, they stated it's going to be a long-form VR game. So a much longer game this time around. And they're saying it'll be something of a comedic action RPG. Well, I just talked about South Park, and that's essentially what their RPG is. So very cool. Hopefully it's along those lines. And really, if you have, played through Accounting, you'd probably agree that, yeah, it is along those same lines. So very cool. Looking forward to that. Next game I want to talk about, Onward. According to Dante, the 20-year-old dev behind the game, major updates in 2017, new maps, new modes, including this one, which got me excited, a co-op gameplay mode, which is very freaking cool. I was never a fan of the multiplayer only aspect. I'd always wished it had single player, even if it was against bots, just due to time constraints and not being able to line up time with buddies or having to rely just on pickup groups, which usually ends up, for me anyways, with my bad luck, in disaster. So the co-op mode, on the other hand, that opens up a lot of doors, has me excited. So very cool. And it's something Dante seems still very excited and passionate about. Based on how he released this game in the state that he did, I take him at his word that he's going to be able to deliver all of these things in 2017. All right, story-wise, Valve removing the $3,000 registration fee for the tracking development kits. Now, you may recall that they were charging $3,000. You had to take a course, and it had to do with quality, is the assumption by most, that, at least they were getting people started at the right level. Well, they've dropped that. And personally, I think it's a good idea that they dropped that. You can still take the course, like if you're interested in that, because it does have good content according to those who have gone through it. Now it's free being the exception. So very cool and a smart move, I believe, on Valve's part. Next news story, the next generation SteamVR tracking base stations. We've talked about those guys at least half a dozen times in the last few months. Well, the latest word on these is that they are better in pretty much every way. And when I say every way, the list is pretty exhaustive. According to them, this is their quote, it's cheaper, it's smaller, it's lighter, it's less noisy, it requires lower power, and we think it will be able to track a little better and have a little better field of view. Basically, the next generation better in every way is how they ended it. Now, for me personally, I've always felt, and I've pretty much said that from day one, that the Vive tracking solution for room scale, it's the best solution that we have. Touch works. Touch is going to be great again, I think, once they get the software bugs worked out for those people. And then there's the possibility of 3 cameras, which I still haven't set up, by the way. I hope to get that to that within the next couple of days. But yeah, for all of those reasons, the ones that get me most excited would probably be the last two. The tracking even better, for the simple reason that as good as the Vive system is, there are still times where, we, the general we, are going to create occlusion. We're going to put ourselves or contort our bodies because of action, not even necessarily doing this consciously, and we're going to lose tracking for a split second, enough to kind of break the immersion. That happens. It's pretty rare, but it happens. So if these can indeed improve the tracking and deliver a wider field of view, because remember, it's a 2-tracking system. So theoretically, with you in the middle and them on either side, well, it should be enough. But the wider field of view may just be able to work around some of those instances of occlusion. And even if it, say, knocks that in half of an already very small percentage, that's not bad. And of course, the cheaper aspect, because one of the things that they're going to have to get to over the next year or two is slowly have those prices get down to that mass adoption level, wherever the hell that is. And I think while they're not there yet, they're going to move in that direction. Next news story, this is mirrors the one from the other day. This time, questions posed to Jason Rubin, who is head of Oculus content. So RoadtoVR had a number of questions. The first one, what traits do you think VR's killer app needs to have? And his response was, the honest answer to this question is we won't know until we have a killer app. Intuitively, I think the app will be large scale, multi-user or social, and endless in the way that World of Warcraft was when it launched. And that's a pretty telling statement. I do agree in the sense that, yes, it's most likely that type of a game. The same reason I like Elite Dangerous so much. It's been my number one VR game for a hell of a long time now, simply because of the longevity. I can play that thing day after day. I haven't played it for almost a week now, but I can. And when I do, and I've logged 300 plus hours, which is chump change to some of you. I know one of you is over 2,500 hours, and the other of you is over 10,000, which is huge. So money, value, absolutely. And that type of an experience may be that killer app. But then again, it could be a very tight game. Maybe it's just the best multiplayer game ever, and each game with you and your buddies only lasts around 10 minutes. That, in my opinion, has almost as much chance as being the next killer app. It depends on the game itself. Just hitting that right formula with a little bit of luck and all the other variables that you need to make that happen and get that Pokemon Go effect. Next question. If you had to make a bet, which sector of virtual reality would you predict as the place for that killer app to emerge? You guys are probably ding, ding, ding with your answer. And yes, you're right. Gaming. Kind of knew that because we're all into that. Or 99% of us are into the gaming VR. So yes, absolutely, he feels game development. So a bit of a Captain Obvious. There's a little more to that. I've included the link. You can check it out. And it sounds like we got a helicopter in the background. We'll just leave that police chopper to chase whatever it's chasing. All right. Next news piece. Short VR, here to stay and isn't a threat, according to UploadVR. Now, what this article does is the author is trying to paint the picture that, look, whether you hate or like short VR experiences, they're here to stay. You better get used to them. Will they be the law of the land? No. But for the foreseeable future, they're going to be the majority of what gets released. And in principle, I kind of agree. And I don't really have a problem with that, provided all this other stuff that's coming out comes out and delivers what it needs to deliver. I'll be okay with that. Now, they expand on that a little bit in their defense of short VR. The example the author used first was being at the top of Mount Everest in the Everest experience. Now, that is a 30 to 40 minute experience. We would probably mostly agree on the short side. And yet he felt on top of that, it was worth absolutely every cent he paid. Fair enough. That's his opinion. His next point, he believes that eventually we won't link the length of many VR experiences with the overall value it offers, just like movies. I think instead we're going to judge them by how well they transport us into another place and into another body. I agree in the sense I think that will be the main component. Yes, not the only though, but probably the main. There's always exceptions. And then his last statement about long VR and short VR existing hand in hand, and that content might be leaning toward the latter right now, but we shouldn't turn our noses up at it. And I get where he's going with that, but there are some lessons of the past to learn from. Here's an example, and it has to do with my beloved arcade industry, okay? In the 1980s, arcade games were designed pretty much based on a single template. And that template was you put a quarter into the machine and your first game you were going to suck. Or you might get lucky, but probably you were going to suck. And your game was maybe going to last about a minute. As you got better, and you only got better by pumping more quarters in, you learned tricks, patterns, AI routines, you got better, your quarter lasted longer. But in a weird twist, you spent just as much, if not more. Basically, they built up the perfect circle of addiction, right? The problem was going into the 90s with the Street Fighter II Turbo era and beyond, they became more about quarter gobblers. There were some games literally, it didn't matter how good your skill set was. The chance of evading the timeout counter was pretty much 0%. And you were forced to keep throwing quarter after quarter down. Obviously, I preferred the model of the 80s, and I think ultimately it was just successful. Sure, you were going to have people hogging a machine for an hour and a half in an arcade because they were that good. But that just gets other people excited watching that guy who are pumping their quarters in. And for weeks, for sure, they're going to suck too. And it worked. And then it stopped working. And lo and behold, even though it was only one of the factors, they pretty much are no more. So virtual reality in that sense, I think they could look to that as a lesson. Next up, 14-year-old Minecraft modder. He basically created a home building VR game. When I think back to myself at age 14, even though I was fairly responsible, had a paper route at the time, and was into game programming in BASIC and a little bit of assembly language and C, it was primitive. There's no way in hell I think I could have cobbled an actual game together, and I didn't. I made, character generation programs for RPGs, that kind of stuff. Now, here's what the father of this child had to say. When I first got the HTC Vive, there was nothing on the market. So I started messing around in Unity. And his kid saw that, started experimenting, taught himself, and there's a whole Reddit thread on this. And the rest, well, it led to this application that he created, which literally looks like a home decoration type project. Haven't tried it myself other than just looking into it. Doesn't look like it would be my bag, but I can appreciate the effort, certainly, that went into it. And either way you look at it, pretty cool feat. Next story, Valve finally bringing SteamVR to Linux as a developer release. This is something they had promised for a long time, right alongside it getting to Macintosh operating system as well. Working with NVIDIA and their latest updates that will actually launch SteamVR with that specific beta on a Linux machine. So very cool. Now, just quickly on that, it always amazes me that there are still people with Linux because I come across them all the time. And I don't mean casually like me. At any given time, I've usually got at least a virtualized version of Linux running. But these people, and my uncle, he's one of these, my uncle in Holland, where everything is Linux. He absolutely refuses Windows. It's free Microsoft, the Office version of the program, Back Office, I think, or whatever the hell the latest version is. Anyways, 100% is where he runs it. So is it that popular at the end of the day, SteamVR? Probably not, but they kept their word in a sense, and those who do use it, I'm sure will appreciate it. And we got to remember, Steam themselves use it on their SteamOS. Next story, TouchSense Force lets devs create better haptic feedback on the Oculus Touch. If I had one complaint other than the tracking on the Oculus Touch controllers, it was a bit of the anemic haptic feedback. I've always felt it wasn't as powerful as the Vive, and it was kind of lacking. It did the job, it just wasn't as good. Well, along come these guys. There's two components, software and hardware side. On the software side, their TouchSense Force features an Unreal Engine plugin, includes a visual editor, and the ability to provide feedback. Also an API to allow devs to do the same with their own custom engines. Basically, according to the article, the company is giving the developers of Oculus Touch games tools to create more accurate haptic feedback that reflects specific situations. Very cool. On the hardware front, they've got Immersion, which is offering a reference design that will allow OEMs to integrate Force into their own devices with features like kinesthetic triggers that can replicate push and pull triggers. So very cool, levers, buttons, that sort of thing, granting more realistic sensations of grabbing objects in VR. Always welcome. Last story, guys, concerns Oculus engineers who are working to make Rift games more compatible with Vive hacks. I did just say with Vive hacks. This is a really good article to read. It restores a little bit of my faith in the Oculus machine in the sense that they had originally talked so much about being open, then seemed to go in a different direction completely. If they're starting to, take a few steps back to the open direction, I'm okay with that. That's what this sounds like. It occurred at a panel discussion during the DICE 2017 summit. And it was Jason Rubin when he was asked to discuss the concept of open platforms in the VR industry. And he was asked by the CEO of Insomniac Games, whose name is Ted Price, what would it take for Oculus to be more open to having its titles on other platforms? His response, just this week I played Dead and Buried with Vive users. I could tell they were Vive users. According to him, he knew they were Vive users because their in-game voice chat was being distorted, according to him, by the hacks they were using. So he goes on to claim that we have done nothing to stop this right now. And in fact, members of the team in Menlo Park are working now to fix the microphone problem. So not only are they tolerating it, they seem to be, at least in an active sense, based on this occasion, supporting it. So good to hear. They've got quite a few steps left to take to go back in that direction, but it's a start. All right, guys, as always, cheers.